When I lost the baby I was already weak. But my husband said I must have fallen on purpose. You never wanted this baby, he screamed. His mother said I was jealous of my pregnant sister-in-law. They held me down as he kicked me. I couldn't scream. I left, bleeding, in the middle of the night. 2 years later he saw me. The blood soaked through the hospital pad in less than 20 minutes. I sat on our pristine white sectional sofa, the one Ryan had insisted we buy because it would photograph well for guests, watching crimson stains spread across Italian leather that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Each cramp felt like my body was trying to turn itself inside out, a physical reminder that Emma was gone. Emma. We'd named her Emma Rose after Ryan's grandmother. I'd whispered that name to my swollen belly for months, promising her stories and lullabies and Saturday morning pancakes shaped like butterflies. Now she was just medical waste in some hospital disposal unit, and I was sitting here bleeding her memory onto expensive furniture. The placental abruption was catastrophic. Dr. Martinez had explained 6 hours earlier, her voice professionally gentle. There was nothing anyone could have done. Sometimes these things just happen. She'd handed me pamphlets about grief counseling and support groups, as if printed words could somehow fill the Emma-shaped hole carved out of my chest. But Ryan hadn't been listening to Dr. Martinez. He'd been pacing the hospital room like a caged animal, his jaw working silently, building toward something explosive. I should have recognized the signs, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the muscle twitching near his left eye, the deliberate slow breathing he did when he was about to lose control. You never wanted this baby anyway. The words tore through our living room like shrapnel. I looked up from the growing blood stain, seeing my husband transform into someone I didn't recognize. His face was twisted with rage, but underneath it was something worse, relief. As if losing Emma had solved some problem he'd been wrestling with. Ryan, please. I tried to stand, but the cramping doubled me over. The hospital had sent me home with instructions to rest, to let my body heal, to take the pain medication every 4 hours. Instead, I was defending myself against accusations that made no sense. Don't you dare act innocent. His voice cracked on the last word, splitting between grief and fury. I saw how you looked when Sophia announced her pregnancy. Pure jealousy. You couldn't stand that she was glowing while you were just what? The question escaped before I could stop it. Just what, Ryan? That's when Victoria appeared in our doorway like a summoned demon. Ryan's mother had her own key, of course. A boundary I'd tried to establish early in our marriage that had been steamrolled by family tradition. She must have been listening from the hallway, waiting for her cue to join the performance. She's always been jealous of Sophia, Victoria hissed, moving toward me with predatory purpose. Look what she's done now. I tried to stand again, needing to escape to the bathroom, to anywhere but this room where the air felt thick with accusation. Victoria's hands clamped down on my shoulders, pressing me back into the sofa with surprising strength for a woman in her 60s. Her manicured nails dug through my hospital gown, finding the tender spots where 4 needles had left bruises. I'm bleeding, I whispered, as if this obvious fact might penetrate their shared madness. I need to. You need to take responsibility, Victoria spat. Sophia is 8 months along and radiant. Radiant. And here you are, destroying what God gave you because you couldn't handle someone else's happiness. The cruelest part was the nursery upstairs. I'd spent 3 weeks painting it sunshine yellow because we'd wanted to be surprised. Gender neutral didn't mean colorless, I told Ryan, showing him paint swatches with names like Morning Glory and Buttercream. I'd hung tiny white curtains with dancing elephants and spent an entire Saturday assembling a changing table that came with 47 separate pieces and instructions written by someone who clearly hated humanity. The drawers were full of impossibly small clothes, onesies with sayings like, Daddy's Little Princess and Mommy's Miracle. I'd bought 3 packages of newborn socks because they were so tiny and perfect, each pair smaller than my thumb. There was a mobile with soft musical notes that played Brahms' lullaby, and a rocking chair where I'd planned to feed Emma in those quiet 3 a.m. moments that every mother told me I'd treasure despite the exhaustion. Ryan knew all of this. He'd helped hang the mobile, complaining about the assembly instructions but smiling when it finally worked. He'd caught me organizing the sock drawer one evening and kissed my forehead saying, "She's going to be so loved." But now, watching his face contort with blame and anger, it was as if those moments had been erased. as if wanting Emma had been some elaborate deception I'd maintained for 6 months. I painted her nursery, I said, my voice barely audible. I bought her socks. Ryan's laugh was sharp and bitter. Performance art. All of it. You were playing house until reality hit, and then you... The kick came without warning. His dress shoe, Italian leather, polished that morning for a client meeting he'd never made it to, connected with my ribs just below my left breast. The impact drove the air from my lungs and sent fire shooting through my already damaged core. I curled instinctively, protective arms wrapping around the emptiness where Emma should have been. Ryan. The scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate. But he was already reaching into his briefcase, pulling out a manila folder with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been planning this moment. Divorce papers scattered across the coffee table like oversized confetti, legal language swimming before my pain-blurred vision. I had these drawn up last month, he said, his voice eerily calm now. After I saw how you looked at Sophia's baby shower photos. I knew then what kind of person you really were. The papers landed on top of the blood spreading across the white leather. Some cosmic joke. My marriage ending in the same scarlet stain as my pregnancy. Get out. His voice was cold now, businesslike. Tonight. I can't even look at you. Victoria finally released my shoulders, stepping back as if she'd completed some necessary task. There's a suitcase in the hallway closet, she said helpfully. Take only what you came with. But I couldn't stand. Every movement sent fresh waves of cramping through my abdomen, and the bleeding had intensified. The hospital pad was useless now, overwhelmed by a flow that felt endless and wrong. I needed medical attention, needed someone to check if this was normal, needed pain medication and clean clothes, and I said get out. Ryan's voice had dropped to a whisper, which somehow felt more threatening than his shouting. I managed to grab my purse from the side table, fingers fumbling for my phone. My parents' number was the first in my recent calls. They'd been checking on me every hour since the hospital released me. But when I tried to dial, Ryan snatched the phone away. You can call them from somewhere else. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt endless. I leaned against the mirrored wall, watching blood seep through the back of my hospital gown and onto the expensive brass handrail. My reflection looked like something from a horror movie. Pale skin, hollow eyes, crimson stains spreading like abstract art across thin cotton. Marcus, the night security guard, was reading a paperback thriller behind his marble desk. He looked up when the elevator dinged, and I watched his face change as he took in my appearance. For a moment I thought he might help, might ask if I needed an ambulance or a phone or just a place to sit down. Instead he looked away deliberately, turning a page in his book with studied concentration. I understood. Ryan was building management's golden boy, the successful businessman who always tipped well at Christmas and never complained about noise ordinances. I was just the crazy wife having some kind of breakdown. The automatic doors whispered open, releasing me into the October night. The cold hit like a physical blow, cutting through the thin hospital gown and raising goosebumps on skin already clammy with shock. I had no shoes. They were upstairs by our bed where I'd kicked them off after returning from the hospital. The concrete sidewalk felt like ice against my bare feet. My parents' house was 12 miles away. I walked 4 blocks before a taxi finally stopped, the driver taking one look at my condition and wordlessly passing me a blanket that smelled like cigarettes and desperation. He didn't ask questions, just drove through empty streets while I bled silently in his backseat. Dawn was breaking when I finally collapsed on my parents' front porch, my finger trembling as I pressed their doorbell. The sound echoed through their quiet house like an alarm, summoning them to find their daughter broken and bleeding, still wearing a hospital gown stained with the evidence of everything I'd lost in one terrible night. The nightmares stopped on a Tuesday in March, exactly 14 months and 3 days after that horrible night. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd recovered those first silent weeks, and realized I'd slept through the entire night without once jerking awake in a cold sweat, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Dr. Sarah Chin had warned me that healing wasn't linear. Some days you'll feel like you're making progress, she'd said during our first session, her voice warm but honest. Other days you'll feel like you're back at square one. That's normal. Trauma doesn't follow a schedule. Those 14 months had been a careful reconstruction of a person I'd forgotten existed. Twice weekly therapy sessions where I learned words like gaslighting and emotional abuse, Clinical terms that somehow made Ryan's behavior feel less like my fault and more like a pattern I'd been trapped in. Grief counseling, where I finally said Emma's name out loud without my voice breaking into pieces. Sleep medication that helped quiet the part of my brain that replayed Victoria's manicured nails pressing into my shoulders, over and over like a broken record. My mother had turned my old room into a craft space years ago, but she quietly moved everything out and repainted the walls a soft lavender. For peace, she'd said, though we both knew it was because I couldn't handle the color white anymore. Too many associations with blood-stained leather and sterile hospital rooms. The farmer's market had become my Saturday morning ritual, a gentle reintroduction to the world beyond therapy appointments and legal meetings. Something about the organized chaos felt manageable. Vendors calling out prices, children laughing, the sweet smell of kettle corn mixing with fresh herbs. It was life happening around me without demanding my participation. I was reaching for a bag of Honeycrisp apples when my shoulder seized, a lingering reminder of that night when Victoria had held me down. The bag was on the highest shelf just beyond my fingertips, and I felt that familiar spike of panic when my body couldn't do something simple. "Here, let me help with that." The voice was soft, careful not to startle. A man about my age with gentle brown eyes and paint-stained fingers reached past me to grab the apple bag. He handed it to me like it was something precious, not just 2 pounds of fruit. "Thank you," I managed, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Those are the best ones," he said, nodding toward my apples. "Sweet but with just enough tartness. Good choice." Lucas worked with his hands. I learned this slowly over weeks of Saturday morning encounters at adjacent produce stands. He restored old furniture, bringing discarded pieces back to life with patience and skill. There was something beautiful about that concept, though I wasn't ready to examine why it appealed to me so deeply. He never pushed for more than our brief conversations about seasonal vegetables and weather patterns. Never asked for my number or suggested meeting elsewhere. Just existed in my peripheral vision, a steady presence who made the farmer's market feel safer somehow. The invitation to coffee came from me 3 months later when I finally worked up the courage. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime? Not here, I mean. Somewhere with actual chairs." His smile was sunshine breaking through clouds. "I'd like that very much." Our first coffee date lasted 4 hours. We talked about books and travel dreams and the way morning light looked different in autumn. Lucas had traveled through Southeast Asia after college, teaching English in small villages where children chased chickens through dusty streets. I told him about my job as a graphic designer, how I'd always loved creating beautiful things from nothing. He didn't ask why I seemed nervous when the barista dropped a ceramic mug, the crash echoing through the cafe like a gunshot. Didn't comment when I chose the seat facing the door, needing to see everyone who entered. Just continued our conversation about his latest restoration project, a 1920s armoire he'd found at an estate sale. The second date was at a quiet bookstore cafe, surrounded by towering shelves and the comforting smell of old pages. Lucas brought me a small succulent in a hand-painted pot. "For your windowsill," he said simply. "They're hard to kill," which I figured might be a selling point. I laughed for the first time in months. Really laughed, not the polite social sounds I'd been making. The plant sat on my bedroom windowsill for weeks, proof that something could thrive under my care. By our third date, I'd started to trust the quiet spaces between us. We were walking through Riverside Park, the same park where everything would later unravel, though I didn't know that yet. Lucas had been telling me about his childhood dog, a golden retriever named Buster who could catch frisbees like an Olympic athlete. "If you're ever ready to talk about whatever happened, I'll listen," he said suddenly, stopping beside a bench overlooking the duck pond. "If not, that's okay too." The words hung in the air like an offering. No pressure, no timeline, no expectation that I owed him my trauma in exchange for his kindness. Just an open door I could walk through whenever I felt ready. "There was a man," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "My husband. Ex-husband now. He hurt me when I was already broken." Lucas sat down on the bench, patting the space beside him. I joined him, watching ducks glide across the water like nothing terrible had ever happened in the world. "That wasn't your fault," he said quietly, and something inside my chest that had been held too tightly finally began to loosen. "None of it." 6 months later I was pregnant again. The 2 pink lines appeared on the test like an accusation, and I sank to my bathroom floor, hyperventilating. What if it happened again? What if my body was broken in ways that couldn't be fixed? What if loving this baby would just lead to more loss? Lucas found me there 20 minutes later, still clutching the plastic stick. He sat beside me on the cold tile floor, not speaking, just being present while I cried out 14 months of carefully buried terror. "We'll figure this out together," he whispered against my hair. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." The pregnancy was different from the beginning. Dr. Martinez, the same doctor who'd explained placental abruption in clinical terms, monitored me closely, scheduling extra ultrasounds and blood work. "Everything looks perfect," she said at each appointment, and slowly, cautiously I began to believe her. Lucas read to my belly every night. Children's books and poetry, sometimes just articles from National Geographic about places we'd visit someday. His voice became the soundtrack to my pregnancy, calm and steady and full of love for a baby he'd never met. When the contractions started on a snowy February morning, I wasn't afraid. Lucas held my hand through each wave, whispering encouragement and terrible jokes that made me laugh between pushes. There were no raised voices in that delivery room, no blame or anger or fear. Just anticipation and joy and the promise of something beautiful being born. Noah entered the world at 6:47 a.m., pink and perfect and screaming with healthy indignation. Lucas cried when the doctor placed him on my chest. Actual tears of happiness that he didn't try to hide or explain away. "Hello, little man," he whispered, stroking Noah's tiny fist. "We've been waiting for you." When Noah smiled for the first time, a real smile, not just gas as everyone assured me, I realized I'd forgotten what pure joy felt like. Joy without fear, without waiting for the other shoe to drop, without wondering what terrible thing would happen next. Just happiness, simple and clean and mine to keep. Noah had discovered the magic of breadcrumbs that Tuesday afternoon, his chubby fingers clutching a piece of sandwich crust like it was treasure. At 15 months, everything fascinated him. The way pigeons bobbed their heads, how shadows moved across playground equipment, the satisfying crunch of autumn leaves under his tiny sneakers. "Burr burr," he squealed, his version of birdie, as a particularly bold pigeon waddled closer to investigate his offering. I sat on the bench nearby, one eye on my son and the other on the novel I'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. Reading in stolen moments between nap times and bedtime stories. This was motherhood's secret language of interrupted thoughts and half-finished conversations. The park was busy for a Tuesday afternoon. School had just let out and older children raced past on their way to the jungle gym, backpacks bouncing. A group of moms had claimed the picnic tables near the water fountain, their coffee cups forming a protective circle around scattered goldfish crackers and juice boxes. Everything felt normal, peaceful even, the kind of ordinary afternoon that would have bored me senseless before Noah, but now felt like a small miracle. That's when I saw him. Ryan stood about 30 yards away, near the Memorial Rose Garden where couples sometimes took engagement photos. He was gesturing toward something with his left hand, and I caught the glint of a wedding band catching afternoon sunlight. The sight hit me like ice water in my veins, though I couldn't understand why. I'd known he would remarry eventually. Men like Ryan always landed on their feet. The woman beside him was everything I'd never been, polished in that effortless way that spoke of expensive salon appointments and personal shoppers. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, not a strand out of place despite the October breeze. She wore cream-colored slacks that somehow stayed pristine around children and dirt, and her engagement ring was massive, a princess-cut diamond that threw rainbows when she moved her hand. She was laughing at something on her phone, completely absorbed in whatever TikTok or Instagram story had captured her attention. Oblivious to the fact that her fiancé had just gone statue still, his face cycling through expressions like a broken slideshow. I watched Ryan's progression of emotions with the detached fascination of someone observing a car crash in slow motion. First came shock. His mouth actually fell open, which would have been comical if my heart wasn't suddenly hammering against my ribs. Then calculation, his eyes narrowing as he processed what he was seeing. Finally, something that looked disturbingly like panic. His gaze shifted from me to Noah, who had abandoned the pigeons and was now investigating a particularly interesting stick. I could practically see the wheels turning in Ryan's head, the mathematical equation he was trying to solve. Counting months, measuring timelines, wondering if the child 15 feet away shared his DNA. Noah chose that moment to toddle toward me, stick clutched triumphantly in his fist. "Mama." "Stick," he announced as if he'd discovered fire. His eyes were Lucas's warm brown, his smile pure sunshine, his entire being radiating the kind of security that comes from being loved unconditionally since birth. I scooped him up, breathing in his sweet baby scent, graham crackers and fresh air and the lingering traces of his morning bath. "What a wonderful stick," I murmured against his soft hair, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. The smart thing would have been to stay. To let Ryan see exactly how unaffected I was by his presence, how completely I'd moved on from the wreckage he'd made of my life. But smart wasn't the same as safe, and every instinct I'd developed over the past 2 years was screaming at me to leave. No. I kissed Noah's forehead, a gesture so automatic it might have been breathing, and started walking toward the parking lot. Not running, not fleeing, just a mother collecting her child and heading home for dinner and bath time. Nothing unusual about that. "Ryan, what's wrong? Who was that woman?" The fiancé's voice carried across the playground, tinged with confusion and something sharper. I didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge that I'd heard anything at all. Let him explain that. Let him try to justify why he'd reacted like he'd seen a ghost to a woman and child he supposedly didn't know. My hands shook as I buckled Noah into his car seat, muscle memory taking over while my mind raced. He babbled happily about birds and sticks, completely unaware that our peaceful afternoon had just been shattered by the appearance of a man who'd once kicked his mother while she bled. The drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and turn signals. Noah fell asleep before we reached our street, exhausted from his adventure. I carried him inside, settling him in his crib with the gentle efficiency of practiced motherhood, then stood in his doorway watching him sleep until my heartbeat finally slowed to something approaching normal. Lucas wouldn't be home for another hour. I made tea with hands that had finally stopped trembling, curling up on our worn sofa with the same novel I'd been attempting to read. The words blurred together, meaningless black marks on white pages, while my mind replayed every second of those terrible few minutes in the park. My phone buzzed at 8:47 p.m., just as I was closing Noah's bedroom door after his final story. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it with the sick certainty of muscle memory. Ryan's old number, the one I'd deleted 2 years ago but somehow still knew by heart. "Is that my child?" 4 words that managed to be both question and accusation, desperation wrapped in the pretense of authority. I stared at the screen until it went dark, then immediately blocked the number. But the damage was already done. Those 4 words told me everything I needed to know about Ryan's mental state, about what he'd been thinking during those long moments of calculation in the park. He'd been wondering. Maybe for months, maybe since the divorce papers were signed and he'd had time to count backwards from conception dates. Maybe since he'd seen Sophia's children and realized what he'd thrown away in a moment of rage and blame. His perfect new life suddenly had a question mark in it. The polished fiancée with her flawless hair and pristine slacks, the fresh start he'd built on the foundation of my destruction, all of it now complicated by the possibility that he'd walked away from his own child. I thought about Amanda. That was her name I'd learned from mutual acquaintances, planning her wedding to a man who'd just sent desperate text messages to his ex-wife. Choosing flowers and venues while her future husband counted months and wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The irony was almost beautiful in its completeness. Ryan had spent our entire marriage accusing me of jealousy, of being unable to handle other people's happiness. Now he was the one consumed by what-ifs, poisoned by the possibility that I'd found everything he'd thrown away. Love, family, the kind of peace that comes from being cherished instead of tolerated. I deleted the blocked message and went to check on Noah one more time. He slept with his arms flung wide, completely trusting that he was safe, that tomorrow would bring more birds and sticks and adventures. In the soft glow of his nightlight he looked exactly like Lucas. Same gentle features, same sense of quiet contentment. Ryan could wonder all he wanted. The truth was simpler than his desperate calculations. Noah was born from love, not obligation. From healing, not damage. From a man who read bedtime stories and painted nurseries and held my hand through every contraction. Some questions didn't deserve answers and some ghosts needed to stay buried. The call came on Friday morning while I was folding Noah's tiny laundry, an endless task that somehow brought me peace. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice crackled through my phone speaker, her slight accent more pronounced than I remembered. "Mija, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I think you should know. That man has been asking questions about you." I stopped mid-fold, a miniature dinosaur t-shirt clutched in my hands. Mrs. Rodriguez had lived 2 doors down from Ryan and me in our old building, a sharp-eyed woman who missed nothing and said little. She'd always been kind to me, the type who remembered your birthday and noticed when you looked tired. What kind of questions? I asked, settling into the rocking chair Lucas had bought for Noah's room. He came by Tuesday night real late. Asked Marcus if he remembered anything from that night his wife had her breakdown. Wanted to know if there were any security cameras, any witnesses to her erratic behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice carried decades of skepticism. Marcus, that fool, he was ready to help until I reminded him what we actually saw. My heart started that familiar rapid-fire rhythm, but I forced my voice to stay steady. What did you tell him? Nothing. But honey, I've been keeping something for you all this time. She explained it slowly, carefully, like she was handling something fragile. That night, the night Ryan kicked me out while I was bleeding, she'd been awakened by voices in the hallway. Angry voices, then crying, then the sound of the elevator opening and closing multiple times. I looked through my peephole first, you understand. Saw that mother of his in the hallway, pacing like a cat. Then I checked my Ring camera. She paused and I could hear her adjusting the phone. I saw everything, Mija. You stumbling to the elevator, asking Marcus to call your parents. The blood on your dress, the way you could barely stand. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. The footage was crystal clear. A woman in obvious medical distress, not someone storming out dramatically as Ryan had apparently told everyone. The camera had captured me begging Marcus for help, had recorded the security guard's deliberate indifference, had documented every painful step I took toward those glass doors. I called 911 that night, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. Told them I thought someone was being attacked. They said they'd send a car, but by the time anyone showed up, you were gone. I filed a written statement anyway, seemed like the right thing to do. She'd saved everything. The video files, the police report number, her own handwritten account of what she'd witnessed. Something felt wrong about his story from the beginning, she said simply. A woman doesn't bleed like that from being dramatic. I found myself crying, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of being believed. For 2 years I'd carried the weight of Ryan's narrative, the nagging doubt that maybe I had been unstable, maybe I had caused everything to fall apart. Mrs. Rodriguez's evidence was like finding water in a desert. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because he's getting married next month and his bride-to-be has been asking around about you. Sweet girl, seems genuinely confused about why her fiancé gets so upset when your name comes up. Figured she deserved to know the truth before she makes a mistake. Word travels fast in certain circles, especially when it involves someone as prominent as Ryan had been in our social group. Within a week of our park encounter, people were talking. Not openly, never openly, but in the careful whispers that accompany scandal. Claire called me on a Thursday evening, her voice shaking with something between guilt and relief. Ryan's sister had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over his rough edges and made excuses for his temper. She'd stayed silent during our divorce, choosing family loyalty over truth. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble. I never believed his version of what happened. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, far from our old neighborhood and the potential for awkward encounters. Claire looked older than her 35 years. Stress lines etched around her eyes like permanent worry. I knew you wanted that baby, she said, stirring sugar into her latte with unnecessary precision. I saw how you looked at Sophia's ultrasound pictures during Christmas dinner. Pure joy, no jealousy. You asked about nursery themes and whether she was feeling the baby move yet. That's not how jealous people behave. She'd heard Ryan's version, the unstable wife who couldn't handle her sister-in-law's pregnancy, who'd somehow caused her own miscarriage through emotional instability. But Claire had also seen the nursery I'd painted, had watched me organize tiny clothes with reverent care. He was drinking more after you lost Emma, she admitted. Said he needed something to deal with the stress of your breakdown. But you weren't having a breakdown, you were grieving and he couldn't handle that it wasn't about him. Sophia reached out 2 days later, her message arriving through Instagram DM like a secret pact between conspirators. Can we talk? I owe you an apology. Sophia had always been Ryan's golden child, the sister-in-law who could do no wrong. Beautiful, successful, married to a surgeon who treated her like a queen. During my marriage, I genuinely admired her life while battling my own insecurities. We met at her office during her lunch break, a sterile conference room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and stress. Sophia was 8 months pregnant with her second child, glowing in that effortless way that had once made me feel invisible. I was scared of him too, she said quietly, her hands resting protectively over her belly. We all were. The way he'd explode over nothing, then act like we were crazy for being upset about it. His temper was always intense. She'd witnessed some of Ryan's behavior firsthand. The way he'd berate waitstaff over minor mistakes, his tendency to punish people with silent treatment when they disappointed him. But she'd also seen something else. Genuine fear in my eyes whenever he raised his voice. At Christmas, when you brought those little booties for my baby, you were so excited about your own pregnancy. There was no jealousy there, just two women sharing something beautiful. I should have spoken up during the divorce, should have told people what I actually saw. The whisper network was expanding, gaining momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. People who'd been afraid to contradict Ryan's narrative suddenly found their voices. His drinking, which had escalated dramatically after I left, became impossible to hide. Colleagues started noticing liquid lunches, missed meetings, the slight tremor in his hands during morning presentations. Amanda, his fiancée, began hearing stories that didn't align with what Ryan had told her about his unstable ex-wife. The woman who'd supposedly been jealous and vindictive didn't match the person people actually remembered. Instead, they recalled someone quiet, kind, perhaps too accommodating for her own good. Dr. Martinez, my former OB-GYN, was bound by medical privacy laws and couldn't discuss my case. But she could confirm, when Amanda asked directly, that placental abruption was indeed a medical emergency beyond anyone's control. It's not caused by emotional stress or jealousy, she said carefully. It's a random, traumatic event that happens to otherwise healthy pregnancies. Ryan's carefully constructed narrative was developing cracks, hairline fractures that threatened to bring down the entire structure. For 2 years he'd been the victim, the devoted husband whose unstable wife had fallen apart under pressure, who'd been forced to make the difficult decision to protect himself from her erratic behavior. But truth has its own gravitational pull, and lies require constant maintenance to stay airborne. With each person who spoke up, each witness who contradicted his version of events, Ryan's story became harder to defend. The irony was almost poetic. The man who'd accused me of jealousy was now consumed by it himself. Jealous of my apparent happiness, my healthy child, my ability to move forward while he remained trapped in a web of his own making. Mrs. Rodriguez's evidence sat in a manila folder on my kitchen counter, unused but comforting. I'd never needed to weaponize the truth. It was finding its own way to the surface, carried by the voices of people who'd finally found the courage to speak. Sometimes justice doesn't require courtrooms or legal battles. Sometimes it's delivered by 78-year-old neighbors with Ring doorbells and the patience to wait for the right moment to reveal what they've been protecting all along. The DUI arrest happened on a Tuesday night in April, 6 months after our encounter at the park. I learned about it through Claire, who called me with a voice full of complicated emotions, relief mixed with genuine concern for her brother's downward spiral. He hit a mailbox at 11:30 p.m., she said quietly. Blood alcohol was twice the legal limit. They found empty bottles in his car, like he'd been drinking while driving. 8 months in county jail gave Ryan plenty of time to construct a new narrative, to polish the story he'd tell Amanda when he got out. During visiting hours, he apparently painted himself as a man whose drinking problems stemmed from losing a child, not through his own cruelty, but through an unstable ex-wife who'd kept that child from him. The manipulation was masterful in its simplicity. He couldn't claim Noah was conceived during our marriage. The timeline was too obvious, too easy to disprove. But he could hint, could let Amanda draw her own conclusions about a woman so vindictive she'd deny a father access to his biological son. Amanda found me through Sophia, who'd finally grown tired of staying silent. She reached out in February, a month before Ryan's release, her message polite but determined. I know this is awkward, but I need to understand what really happened between you and Ryan. Would you be willing to meet? We sat in the same cafe where I'd met Claire months earlier, but this time I was the one with answers instead of questions. Amanda was even more beautiful in person. Porcelain skin that spoke of good genetics and expensive skincare, hair that fell in perfect waves despite the February humidity. But her eyes held something I recognized, the exhaustion that comes from trying to make sense of contradictory stories. "He told me about Noah," she said without preamble, her engagement ring catching the overhead lights as she twisted it nervously. "Said you've been keeping his son from him out of spite." I didn't cry or rage or defend myself with the desperate energy of someone wrongly accused. Instead, I opened the folder I'd brought. Medical records, hospital discharge papers, birth certificates with their unmistakable timestamps. "I lost my baby the night Ryan kicked me while I was bleeding from a miscarriage," I said simply, spreading the documents across the small table like evidence in a courtroom. "Noah was born 2 years later to the man who helped me heal." Amanda studied the papers with the focused intensity of someone trained to analyze data. She was a forensic accountant, I learned later. Someone whose job required her to find truth hidden in numbers and dates. The math was simple, brutal in its clarity. Noah had been conceived 11 months after my divorce was finalized, born to a different father in a different life. "Why would he lie about this?" she asked, her voice smaller now, confused. I shrugged, gathering the papers back into their neat stack. Maybe he needed to believe he was the victim instead of the villain. She called me 3 days later, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I found text messages on his old phone," she said. "Things he sent you right after you lost the baby. Horrible things." Her voice cracked. "How did you survive being married to someone so cruel?" I told her about Lucas, about therapy, about learning that love didn't have to include fear. She listened with the intensity of someone taking notes for a test she couldn't afford to fail. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in March at Riverside Country Club, the same venue where Ryan's parents had celebrated their 25th anniversary, where I'd once attended his cousin's reception and foolishly imagined my own future celebration. Amanda had planned everything during his incarceration, creating what she thought would be his redemption story. I wasn't invited, obviously, but Sophia was. She called me that evening with a voice full of amazement and something close to admiration. "You're not going to believe what just happened." The ceremony had started normally enough. Ryan stood at the altar in his rented tuxedo, not the designer suit he'd worn to our wedding, which had been sold to pay legal fees. His groomsmen flanked him, a collection of old fraternity brothers who'd spent years enabling his worst impulses while calling it loyalty. Amanda walked down the aisle looking ethereal in vintage lace, her father beaming beside her. The guests probably thought she looked nervous. Normal wedding jitters for a bride marrying a man fresh out of jail. They had no idea she'd spent the previous week discovering the full extent of Ryan's capacity for cruelty. When Pastor Williams reached the vow portion of the ceremony, Amanda did something no one expected. Instead of reciting the traditional promises, she pulled out her phone and began reading from the screen. "You deserve to lose that baby," she read to the stunned assembly, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "Maybe now you'll stop being so selfish and think about someone else for once." The congregation sat frozen, unsure if this was some kind of modern ceremony they didn't understand. Ryan's face went white, then red, then white again as Amanda continued reading his own words back to him. "I should have seen the signs earlier, your jealousy, your need for attention. At least now I know what kind of person I married." Amanda's voice never wavered, professional and clear as if she were presenting financial findings to a corporate board. Victoria, resplendent in mother of the groom silver, tried to stand but seemed unable to move. The woman who'd held me down while her son kicked me couldn't meet anyone's eyes as her family's secrets spilled across the altar like blood on white leather. "These are text messages Ryan sent to his first wife," Amanda announced to the bewildered crowd. "The night she lost their baby at 6 months. While she was bleeding and grieving, he was texting her these messages." She pulled off his grandmother's engagement ring, a family heirloom that had supposedly been passed down for 3 generations, and dropped it onto the altar with a sharp ping that echoed through the suddenly silent chapel. "I cannot marry a man capable of such cruelty," she said simply, then turned and walked back down the aisle she'd just traveled as a bride. The exodus was slow and painful. Guests filed out in confused clusters, whispering among themselves, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Ryan's groomsmen looked ashamed, finally understanding what kind of man they'd been defending with their silence and complicity. Even his college roommate, who'd given the bachelor party speech about Ryan being misunderstood by people who didn't know his heart, couldn't look at him. The best man quietly removed the boutonniere from his lapel and placed it on a pew before leaving without a word. The venue coordinator, a professional woman who'd probably seen every kind of wedding disaster, later told Sophia that she'd never experienced anything quite like it. The reception hall sat empty for 3 hours. Round tables decorated with Amanda's carefully chosen centerpieces, a 4-tier cake adorned with sugar flowers that would never be cut, a dance floor that would never feel the weight of celebrating feet. Catered dinner grew cold under warming lamps while vendors waited for instructions that never came. The photographer packed up his equipment without taking a single picture of the non-existent reception. The DJ played music to an empty room until someone finally told him to stop. Ryan stood at that altar for a full 5 minutes after Amanda left, as if he couldn't quite process what had happened. His perfect redemption story had crumbled in front of everyone who mattered to him, destroyed not by my vindictiveness or jealousy, but by his own documented cruelty finally finding its way to the surface. The truth had taken its time, but it had arrived precisely when it would do the most damage to the lies he'd built his new life on. Amanda had saved herself from making the same mistake I had, but she'd also inadvertently delivered the justice I'd never sought, complete and public humiliation administered by his own words, in front of everyone he'd ever wanted to impress. The silence that followed Ryan's wedding disaster was profound, not the tense quiet that precedes a storm, but the deep peace that settles after one has finally passed. For the first time in years, my phone didn't buzz with cryptic messages or hang-up calls. No more accidental encounters at places I used to frequent. Ryan had vanished from my world as completely as if he'd never existed. Lucas proposed on a Tuesday evening in November, while Noah napped and dinner simmered on the stove. Nothing dramatic or orchestrated, just him kneeling beside my chair at our kitchen table, holding a simple solitaire that caught the light from our pendant lamp. "I love the life we've built," he said quietly. "I love how you make coffee in the morning and sing to Noah when you think no one's listening. I love that you trust me with your fears and your dreams. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he'd finished the question, tears streaming down my face as Noah stirred in his crib down the hall, as if sensing that something beautiful was happening in our little house. We planned the wedding for the following spring, choosing my parents' backyard because it felt right. Intimate, safe, surrounded by people who'd watched me rebuild myself from the ground up. My mother and I spent weeks stringing lights through the old oak tree I'd climbed as a child, the same tree that had sheltered my childhood tea parties and teenage heartbreaks. Noah took his ring-bearer duties with the solemn intensity that only a 2.5-year-old could muster. He practiced walking slowly for weeks, clutching the tiny basket like it contained the crown jewels. On the wedding day, he made it halfway down the petal-strewn aisle before spotting a butterfly and abandoning his post to chase it through my mother's flower garden. The guests laughed, the kind of warm, affectionate laughter that celebrates life's unpredictable moments instead of judging them. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, wearing a lavender dress she'd bought specially for the occasion. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief throughout the ceremony, whispering to my mother, "This is how it should be. This is how love looks." The same neighbors who'd once heard my screams through thin apartment walls now applauded as Lucas and I exchanged vows. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who'd brought me soup during those first terrible weeks, beamed like a proud grandmother. The mailman who'd delivered divorce papers years earlier now carried wedding invitations, the circle of my story completing itself in ways I'd never imagined. Claire came with her 4-year-old son Marcus, who immediately attached himself to Noah like they were long-lost cousins. She looked lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth about her brother had lifted some invisible weight from her shoulders. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said during the reception, watching our boys chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I was a coward." "You spoke up when it mattered," I replied, squeezing her hand. "That's what counts." She'd cut contact with Ryan after the wedding debacle, she told me. Not from anger but from exhaustion. The bone-deep tiredness that comes from enabling someone's worst impulses for decades. "He needs help," she said simply. "But I can't fix him and I can't keep pretending his behavior is normal." Sophia sent a beautiful crystal vase with an apologetic note. She couldn't attend because she was on bed rest with her 3rd pregnancy, but she wanted us to know how happy she was for my new beginning. Victoria predictably remained silent. Some people, I'd learned, would rather preserve their version of reality than acknowledge uncomfortable truths. 3 years later, I encountered Amanda in the frozen food aisle of our local grocery store. She was examining ice cream flavors with the careful attention of someone planning a special evening. The massive engagement ring was gone, replaced by a simple gold band that caught the fluorescent lighting as she reached for a pint of mint chocolate chip. "How are you?" she asked, her smile genuine and warm. There was a lightness to her that hadn't been there during our coffee meeting years earlier, a sense of someone who'd dodged a bullet and knew it. "Good," I said, gesturing to Noah, now 5 and helping me load our cart with his favorite cereal. "Really good. How about you?" She showed me photos on her phone. Her new husband, a middle school science teacher who coached Little League on weekends. Their engagement photos showed a man with kind eyes and laugh lines. Someone who looked at Amanda like she was the best surprise life had ever given him. "Thank you," she said simply, closing her phone. "You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." "You saved yourself," I told her truthfully. "I just told you the truth." She hugged me then, right there between the frozen pizzas and ice cream, 2 women who'd survived the same man in different ways. "I hope you're incredibly happy," she whispered against my ear. The strangest part about my new life was its beautiful ordinariness. No drama, no crisis management, no walking on eggshells or bracing for the next explosion. Lucas and I argued about normal things: whose turn it was to take out the garbage, whether Noah needed a haircut, where to vacation next summer. Arguments that ended with compromise instead of punishment, discussions instead of dictates. Noah called Lucas Daddy without any prompting or explanation needed. To him, this was simply the natural order of things. Daddy read bedtime stories and built elaborate block towers and taught him to ride a bike in the driveway. There was no other man in our story, no complications or confusion about family structure. Mrs. Rodriguez's manila folder remained tucked in my desk drawer, evidence I'd never needed to use but found comforting nonetheless. Proof that my memories were real, that the truth had witnesses, that justice sometimes comes in unexpected forms delivered by elderly neighbors with Ring doorbells and strong moral compasses. Sometimes, usually late at night when the house was quiet and Noah was sleeping safely in his room, I wondered about Ryan. Whether he'd gotten help for his drinking, learned to take responsibility for his actions, found some measure of peace. But these thoughts were fleeting, more curiosity than concern. Mostly I didn't think about him at all. I hadn't destroyed Ryan's life. His choices had done that. The drinking, the cruelty, the refusal to accept responsibility for his actions. Amanda's public reading of his text messages hadn't created his character. It had simply revealed what was already there. I just refused to carry his shame anymore, and apparently that had been enough. My therapist had warned me that healing wasn't about forgiveness or revenge. It was about indifference. The ability to think about your abuser the way you'd think about a stranger on the bus. Briefly, without emotional investment, then not at all. I'd reached that blessed state of psychological freedom where Ryan existed in my past like any other closed chapter. The oak tree in my parents' backyard grew new leaves each spring, its branches reaching higher toward sunlight. Noah would climb it someday just as I had, learning that even the strongest trees bend in storms but rarely break. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or perfect justice. Mine ended with something better. Peace and the quiet knowledge that truth has its own timeline, its own way of setting things right. If this story of quiet justice had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Amanda read Ryan's cruel text messages at the altar, exposing his true nature to everyone. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. The music was still playing, a soft hum beneath the chatter of guests who lingered in the reception hall, their laughter blending with the clinking of champagne glasses. The air smelled of roses and vanilla from the towering wedding cake, and everywhere I turned people smiled, toasting to my supposed happiness. But I wasn't happy. Not anymore. Because in that one moment my entire world shifted. I had stepped away from the dance floor for just a second, the fabric of my wedding dress trailing behind me like a ghost. The night had been overwhelming, so much excitement, so much love. Or at least that's what I thought. But fate has a cruel way of revealing truths when you least expect them. As I turned the corner behind one of the floral arches, adjusting my veil, I heard a voice that made my stomach tighten. "You could do better than her. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to thank you for being here. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about taking back control, about standing up when others expect you to fall. If you love stories of justice and unexpected twists, consider subscribing. It's free and it helps us keep bringing you powerful narratives like this one. Now let's dive into a tale of love, deception, and the ultimate reckoning. It was Liam, my stepbrother. His voice was low, laced with amusement, but it carried clearly in the quiet hallway. My pulse quickened. The words felt like a slap, but before I could process them, another voice answered. Ethan. My husband. The man I had just vowed to spend my life with. He chuckled. Not an uncomfortable, dismissive laugh. Not a forced one. No, this was easy. Natural. Like he agreed. I know, man, Ethan replied, his tone light as if they were discussing something as trivial as the weather. But what can you do, right? My breath caught in my throat. The bouquet in my hands trembled. The warmth of the reception hall suddenly felt suffocating, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My fingers curled around the delicate petals of the roses, crushing them slightly. My wedding night. My husband. And this. I should have stormed in. I should have demanded answers. I should have screamed. But I didn't. Instead, I stood frozen, my body betraying me, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. Liam laughed softly. Well, at least you locked her down. That's all that matters, right? She's naive. She actually loves you. You've got her right where you want her. Ethan hummed in agreement. Yeah. She won't be going anywhere. I felt something inside me snap. I had loved Ethan. Truly, deeply. I had trusted him, believed in him, supported him through everything. And Liam, he had always been cruel to me, always trying to tear me down, but this was something else. This was calculated, deliberate. And Ethan had let it happen. No, he had participated in it. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to walk into that hallway and watch their expressions shift when they saw me standing there, listening. But then a different thought settled in. A dangerous, thrilling thought. They thought I wouldn't go anywhere. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was naive. I almost laughed at how foolish they were. I took a step back, carefully making sure not to make a sound. I had to be composed. I had to be smart. If they thought they had won, if they believed I was helpless, I would let them. Because the game had just begun. I made my way back to the ballroom, my face neutral, my emotions locked away beneath a mask of practiced smiles. People continued to dance, unaware that in the span of mere minutes, I had gone from being a woman celebrating love to one quietly plotting revenge. I turned, scanning the crowd, my gaze finally landing on Ethan. He looked radiant under the golden lights, laughing at something his groomsmen said. And Liam? He was right beside him, grinning as if he hadn't just torn me apart with his words. I forced myself to breathe. The betrayal stung, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I walked toward them, my hands steady, my chin lifted. Ethan turned to me, his smile wide, his eyes twinkling with the kind of ease that only comes when you think you're untouchable. There's my beautiful wife, he said, reaching for my hand. I let him take it. Because tonight I would play the role of the devoted, unsuspecting wife. I would let him think he had won. But tomorrow the game would change. The reception carried on, the hours passing in a blur of forced laughter and empty conversations. When it was finally time for Ethan and me to leave, I walked out of that venue with a quiet determination burning inside me. He held my hand all the way to the car, unaware that the warmth in my touch had already turned to ice. As we drove off, leaving the grand hall behind, I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur together. My mind raced, formulating possibilities, strategies. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about Liam too. They had both underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Ethan squeezed my hand. That was a perfect night, he murmured. I turned to him, forcing a soft smile. Yes, I said. Perfect. He had no idea. By the time we reached the hotel suite, Ethan was relaxed, unwinding as if the night had been nothing more than a beautiful beginning to our lives together. He poured champagne, handed me a glass, kissed my forehead. But I didn't drink. I just watched him, studied him, memorized every move, every smug expression. It was fascinating, really. How easily people could lie. How effortlessly someone you loved could betray you and think they'd never be caught. Ethan went on about our honeymoon plans, his excitement evident. I listened, nodding at all the right moments. But inside I was thinking about how different his life would look once I was through with him. because tomorrow he would wake up to something he never saw coming. I lay beside him that night, my body still, my heart steady. Ethan slept easily, peacefully, while I remained awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind weaving together the perfect storm. He thought I was his. He thought I was trapped. But Ethan had just married the wrong woman. And by the time he realized it, it would be too late. The first morning of my marriage should have been filled with soft whispers, sleepy smiles, and the warmth of new beginnings. Instead, I woke up next to a man I could no longer recognize. Ethan's breathing was steady beside me, his face peaceful as if he had not just hours ago mocked the woman he had promised to cherish. The irony of it all was suffocating. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the previous night settle over me like a heavy, unshakable fog. The words he and Liam had exchanged played on repeat in my mind, each syllable slicing through my thoughts like a blade. You could do better than her. She's naive. You've got her right where you want her. I turned my head slightly, watching Ethan sleep. His expression was one of complete contentment, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beside him. He thought he had won. He believed his web of deceit was still intact. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that he had underestimated me in ways he would soon regret. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, my bare feet against the cool marble floor. The early morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. Everything was beautiful, picturesque. The kind of setting I had once imagined my first day as a wife would be. But now all I saw was a carefully crafted illusion, a mirage that was already beginning to crack. I walked over to the vanity, my reflection staring back at me, unrecognizable. The girl in the mirror had gone to sleep a bride and woken up someone else entirely. Her eyes were sharper, her lips pressed into a firm line. There was no trace of love in her gaze, only cold determination. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. I had work to do. Ethan stirred behind me, shifting under the covers. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I turned, forcing a soft smile. "Morning." He stretched, yawning. "Last night was perfect, wasn't it?" His eyes met mine, warm, affectionate. "Why? A well-rehearsed act." I nodded. "Perfect." He had no idea how good I was at pretending. Ethan rolled out of bed, walking over to where I stood. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me into him, pressing a kiss to my temple. I let him. I needed him to believe nothing had changed, that I was still his naive, trusting wife. If he saw even a flicker of doubt in my eyes, everything I was planning would be ruined. "I was thinking we should have breakfast on the balcony," he suggested, his fingers brushing over my arm. "Just us. No more chaos, no more guests. Just you and me." How ironic. He wanted intimacy now after what he had done. The thought made my stomach turn, but I smiled anyway. "That sounds nice." He kissed me once more before stepping away to grab his phone. As he scrolled through it, a slow smirk curved on his lips. "Liam's already up. He sent me a text saying he's still laughing about last night." I swallowed the anger that rose in my throat. Still laughing. Of course he was. Liam had spent years making a sport out of making me feel insignificant. Why would my wedding night be any different? I moved to my suitcase, pretending to look for something, my mind racing. I had spent the entire night plotting, running through every possible move I could make. I needed to be strategic. Revenge was best served slowly, with precision, and I intended to make every moment of this count. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my messages. Among them was one I had sent to myself at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. Step 1. Establish control. Ethan thought he had the upper hand, but I had leverage. Real leverage. I had spent years listening, watching, absorbing every little detail about him, about Liam. And now all of it was going to come back to haunt them. He thought he had married a woman who would never leave. But I had already started paving my way out. The first step. Money. Ethan had always been careless about his finances. He trusted me enough to let me handle most of our joint accounts, and while I had never considered exploiting that before, last night had changed everything. He had built this marriage on deceit. Why should I play by the rules? While Ethan showered, I opened my laptop and got to work. I transferred small amounts, nothing too noticeable, into a separate account. A safety net. If this was going to end, it was going to end on my terms. I closed the laptop just as Ethan walked out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist. "You coming?" he asked, running a hand through his damp hair. I smiled. I'll be right there. As soon as he was gone, I exhaled slowly. Step 1 complete. Over breakfast, Ethan was all charm. He talked about our future, our plans, completely oblivious to the fact that I was memorizing every word, filing them away for later. I played the role of the adoring wife to perfection. Every laugh, every affectionate glance, I delivered it flawlessly. He had no idea the foundation beneath him was already crumbling. Halfway through our meal, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, smirked, and set it down without responding. Liam wants to grab drinks later. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. You two really are close, huh? Ethan grinned. Always have been. He's like a brother to me. I forced a laugh. More than me. Ethan chuckled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Different kind of bond. That was all I needed to hear. I finished my coffee, setting my cup down with a quiet clink. You should go, I said, keeping my voice light. Celebrate. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching me. You're okay with that? I nodded. Of course. You should enjoy yourself. He didn't need to know I had already set things in motion. That night, as Ethan and Liam clinked their glasses together, reveling in their misplaced confidence, I was making phone calls. I had information, real damaging information, and it was about to see the light of day. Liam had a lot of skeletons. Ethan had even more. And soon they would both realize just how dangerous it was to underestimate me. As I closed my laptop, I allowed myself a small smile. They thought I was a fool. They had no idea. By the time they figured it out, it would be too late. I watched the night unfold through my phone screen, scrolling through the images Liam had just posted. There they were, Ethan and Liam, drinks in hand, laughing like kings in a world that had never once told them no. They looked so at ease, so confident in their control over everything, including me. A slow smile played on my lips. Confidence was a dangerous thing. It made people blind. It made them underestimate the quiet ones, the observers, the people who listened instead of spoke. Ethan had spent years believing I was just his shadow, someone who followed, someone who adored, someone who would never dare to disrupt the perfect little kingdom he had built for himself. He was wrong. I leaned back on the hotel bed, my fingers tightening around my phone as I read the messages between Ethan and Liam, ones I had pulled from Ethan's cloud earlier that evening. They were careless, so painfully careless. The same man who had once whispered sweet promises into my ear was now laughing at me in texts, calling me predictable, easy to manipulate. Liam, of course, encouraged it as if my feelings were nothing more than an afterthought. She's too in love to ever leave. That was what Ethan had written just 2 weeks before our wedding. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. Anger was a tempting thing, but I needed to be smarter than that. Reckless revenge would do nothing but make me look foolish. No, if I was going to do this, I had to do it right. And that meant taking everything from Ethan piece by piece, the same way he had slowly taken my trust and turned it into a joke. The first crack had already formed with the small financial transfers I had made earlier that morning. But I needed more. Something bigger. Something that would shake him to his core. I opened a private folder on my phone and clicked on a video I had saved months ago, something I had nearly forgotten about. It was an old clip of Liam at a party, stumbling through a drunken rant about how Ethan wasn't nearly as loyal to me as I believed. At the time, I had brushed it off as another one of his mean-spirited jabs. But now it was evidence. I watched the video again, memorizing the slurred words. Ethan, oh please. That guy could charm the teeth off a wolf. You think he's faithful? I've literally seen him leave bars with other girls. But hey, let's not tell his little princess, huh? She's too perfect to ruin with the truth. Perfect. That was the word Liam had always used to describe me, but never as a compliment. It was an insult. A way to remind me that I was naive, that I believed in things they saw as weaknesses. Love, loyalty, honesty. I exhaled sharply. This wasn't just about making Ethan feel the sting of betrayal. This was about making both of them realize that the girl they had spent years underestimating was done playing their game. Ethan's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He had left it there, assuming I wouldn't dare look at it. I did. A message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. Hope you made it back safe. Last night was fun. Winky face. The breath left my lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. My fingers tightened around the device, but my face remained expressionless. So it wasn't just in the past. He was still doing it. Still lying. Still pretending. I placed the phone back exactly as it was and walked to the hotel bathroom, turning on the faucet to mask the sound of my breathing. The rage threatened to bubble over, but I swallowed it down, forcing my mind to focus. Ethan thought I was blind. Liam thought I was weak. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. By the time Ethan stumbled back into the suite later that night, I was already in bed, facing away from him. I felt the bed shift as he climbed in beside me, his hand briefly touching my shoulder before he hesitated. Still awake. His voice was low, careful. I kept my breathing even, making him think I was asleep. He let out a quiet sigh, rolling onto his back. "Love you," he murmured. The words meant nothing now. The next morning I moved carefully, methodically. I made breakfast, I smiled, I kissed his cheek. He had no idea that I had spent the early hours of dawn setting the stage for his downfall. I sent the video of Liam's drunken confession to an anonymous email account. From there, it would be distributed strategically, to a few close friends, a few colleagues, and eventually someone who mattered. I wasn't going to release everything at once. No, I wanted to watch as the foundation beneath them started to shake little by little. Ethan left for a meeting, completely oblivious. Liam, on the other hand, was already texting, asking if Ethan had seen the weird message someone had sent him. Not yet, I thought. But he will. I spent the afternoon carefully laying out the next phase. Ethan had always been cautious with his image, obsessed with how people perceived him. That was his weakness. If I could make him feel like the world was starting to doubt him, he would panic. And panicked people made mistakes. I made sure a few anonymous messages found their way to his office, hinting at infidelity rumors. The video of Liam? That was just the beginning. Because what neither of them knew was that I had more. More texts. More receipts. More proof. And I wasn't just going to expose Ethan's betrayal. I was going to make sure that when everything fell apart, Liam went down with him. By the time Ethan came home that evening, something had shifted. His usual confident stride was tighter, his eyes scanning me carefully. "Did you hear from Liam today?" he asked casually, pouring himself a drink. I took a sip of my tea, meeting his gaze with practiced innocence. "No." "Why?" He hesitated, swirling the glass in his hand. "Nothing. Just some weird messages going around. Someone sent him something about me." I frowned, tilting my head. "That's strange." He studied me for a long moment before forcing a chuckle. "Yeah. Probably nothing." I smiled. "Probably." Ethan had spent years believing he could play me like a fool. He had no idea I was the one moving the pieces now. And soon he'd have no game left to play. Ethan's fingers drummed against the counter, his grip tightening around his glass. The flickering light above the kitchen cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the tension etched into his features. I sipped my tea calmly, meeting his wary gaze with practiced ease. "Did you see anything unusual today?" he asked, his voice laced with something that almost sounded like concern. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Unusual? Oh, should I have?" His jaw clenched, the faintest flicker of doubt crossing his eyes. "Just some weird messages. Nothing serious." I hummed, setting my cup down. "Well, if it's nothing serious, why do you look so tense?" He forced a chuckle, shaking his head. "I don't. Just tired, I guess." Liar. I could see the tiny fractures forming, the beginning of his world slowly unraveling. He wasn't panicking, not yet, but he was starting to sense something was off. I was good. I didn't want him to crumble too quickly. No, I wanted to watch him squirm, to feel the weight of uncertainty press down on him like an invisible noose. The next morning I woke up to hushed voices in the hallway. Ethan's tone was sharp, laced with frustration. I didn't need to hear every word to know he was talking to Liam. I swung my legs over the bed, slipping into my robe before stepping into the doorway. Ethan stood near the window, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't know where it came from, Liam. That's the problem." His fingers raked through his hair. "What do you mean, it doesn't matter?" "Of course it matters. If someone has this, what else do they have?" I leaned against the frame, my voice soft. "Everything okay?" Ethan stiffened, turning sharply. His expression flickered between surprise and something else. Guilt, maybe? I kept my face neutral, waiting. He ended the call abruptly, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Just work stuff. On a Sunday morning?" I raised an eyebrow. His laugh was forced. "You know how it is." I did. I knew exactly how it was. Over the next few days, the tension in our house became palpable. Ethan was distracted, his phone glued to his hand more than usual. Every time he thought I wasn't looking, I saw the flickers of worry dance across his face. And Liam? He was unraveling faster. The first time I saw the panic hit him was at a dinner party Ethan had planned. A desperate attempt to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. I played along, smiling, laughing, keeping up the act, while Ethan kept shooting discreet glances at his phone. Liam arrived late, his usual arrogant confidence dimmed. His eyes darted around the room as if expecting someone to corner him. When he finally reached our table, he yanked Ethan aside. I followed at a distance, staying just close enough to hear. "This is bad, man," Liam muttered, his voice sharp. "Whoever sent that video knew what they were doing. People are talking." Ethan's face darkened. "Keep your voice down." Liam exhaled harshly, shaking his head. "We need to find out who's behind this." I smiled to myself. "Liam, you already know, don't you?" Their paranoia was spreading and I was feeding it little by little. Small, carefully placed rumors. Anonymous messages. Just enough breadcrumbs to make them wonder, to make them question everything. And then I made my next move. One night, when Ethan was asleep, I unlocked his laptop with the passcode he never thought I would remember. I scrolled through his emails, searching for anything useful. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. An email thread between Ethan and a woman whose name I didn't recognize. I clicked it open. The messages were recent. Too recent. "Can't stop thinking about last weekend. Wish we had more time alone. You looked so beautiful when you left. When can I see you again?" I stared at the words, my pulse steady. I had suspected it for a while now, but having proof in front of me made something inside me settle into place. There was no sadness, no heartbreak. Just confirmation of what I had already known. I took screenshots, sending them to myself before deleting all traces of what I had done. When I shut the laptop, I turned to look at Ethan's sleeping form. He had no idea. The next morning, I sat across from him at breakfast, watching as he scrolled through his phone. He looked exhausted, the weight of his paranoia finally settling in. "You seem stressed," I said lightly. He forced a laugh. "Just work." "And Liam's freaking out." "Oh." I poured myself another cup of coffee. Why would Liam be freaking out? Ethan hesitated. "It's nothing. Just some rumors." I tilted my head. "Rumors about what?" He glanced up, studying me as if trying to gauge how much I knew. I met his gaze evenly, offering nothing. Finally, he shook his head. "It's not important." If only he knew. That evening, I sent the screenshots to Liam. Not with a message, not with an explanation. Just the images, letting him interpret them however he wanted. The response was almost immediate. "Liam, what the hell is this?" I didn't reply. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. 30 minutes later, Ethan stormed into the room, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "What did you do?" His voice was tight, controlled. I set my book down, looking up at him. "What are you talking about?" His phone shook in his hand. "Liam just sent me something." "Something that was sent to him?" I raised an eyebrow. "And?" He clenched his jaw. "And someone is messing with us." I stared at him for a long moment, then let out a soft laugh. "Messing with you? Ethan, you've been lying to me for years. Why would you assume someone else is the problem?" His eyes darkened. "You think this is funny?" I stood, walking toward him slowly. "No, Ethan. I think this is overdue." His expression flickered. Anger, realization, fear. "You," he whispered. I smiled. "Me." His entire body tensed, as if he finally understood that the woman standing in front of him wasn't the same one he had married. I leaned in slightly. "You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought I wouldn't fight back. But Ethan, darling," I let my voice drop, my smile widening. "You should have known better." And just like that, his world tilted on its axis. Because he knew, really knew, that he was about to lose everything. Ethan stood there, his hands gripping his phone so tightly I half expected it to shatter. His eyes flickered with a whirlwind of emotions, anger, disbelief, and beneath it all, a creeping sense of fear. He had spent years thinking he was in control, that I was just a piece on his chessboard, a pawn too blind to notice she was being moved. But now he was realizing the truth. The game had flipped and I was the one holding the pieces. I watched the realization settle over him, a slow and painful process, like watching a man trying to outrun an avalanche. only to realize he was standing directly in its path. "You set me up," he said finally, his voice hollow as if he couldn't quite believe it. I tilted my head, allowing a small, knowing smile. "Set you up? Oh, Ethan. I simply gave you exactly what you deserved." His jaw clenched, his breathing shallow. He took a step closer, and for the first time, I saw something in his expression that had never been there before. Powerlessness. The very thing he had spent his life avoiding. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, his voice low, like a man on the edge of a cliff, grasping for solid ground. I let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, Ethan," I said, shaking my head. "I understand perfectly." The weight of my words hung between us, thick and suffocating. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew that whatever control he once had over me was gone, shattered beyond repair. A loud vibration against the countertop broke the silence. His phone. Another message. He glanced at it, and for a second his face paled. I stepped forward, peering over his shoulder just enough to see the preview of the message. It was from an unknown number. But I already knew what it was. "Anonymous, hope your wife didn't see the rest of the messages. That would be unfortunate." Ethan's hand hovered over the screen as if touching it would somehow make the problem disappear. But problems like these didn't disappear. They grew, spreading like wildfire, consuming everything in their path. He turned to me sharply. "What did you do?" I met his gaze, my expression calm, controlled. "I simply told the truth." His breathing was uneven now, panic slipping through the cracks of his once perfect composure. He ran a hand over his face, pacing the length of the room, muttering something under his breath. Then suddenly he stopped. His head snapped up. "Liam," he whispered. His eyes locked onto mine, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "Liam knew, didn't he? That's why he's panicking." I didn't respond. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "He was in on this. That traitor." I cut him off with a soft, amused voice. "Oh, Ethan. You still don't get it, do you?" He narrowed his eyes. "Get what?" I took my time, stepping around him, making sure he felt the weight of every second, the tension curling between us like an invisible rope tightening around his throat. Then I leaned in just enough so that he had no choice but to listen. "This was never just about you," I whispered. Ethan's entire body went rigid. He blinked, processing my words, and when they finally sank in, I saw it. The realization, the sheer depth of what I had done. It wasn't just about exposing him. It was about destroying the foundation beneath him. Their business. Their friendships. Everything they had built together, every lie they had told, every time they had laughed at my expense. I had dismantled it all, piece by piece. His breathing quickened, his gaze darting to his phone again as if expecting another blow to land. "Maybe it would." "You don't know what you've done," he muttered again, but this time the words held no conviction. I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "Oh, I know exactly what I've done." The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I could see the war raging inside him. He wanted to fight back. He wanted to regain control. But there was nothing left for him to hold on to. Then the phone rang. Ethan hesitated, then finally answered. "What?" he snapped. I watched, arms crossed, as his face twisted into something I had never seen before, real, unfiltered panic. "What do you mean it's everywhere?" he hissed. Pause. "No, I don't know who leaked it. Who else has seen it?" Another pause. His shoulders stiffened, his face draining of all color. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. No, this can't happen. We need to control the damage." A bitter chuckle escaped me. Ethan turned sharply. "You think this is funny?" I shrugged. "I think it's overdue." He ended the call, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. When he finally met my gaze again, there was something new in his eyes. Defeat. For the first time, Ethan Murphy had lost. I took a slow step forward, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Did you really think I wouldn't fight back?" I asked, my voice softer now, almost pitying. He swallowed hard, but he had no answer. The mighty, untouchable Ethan Murphy, brought to his knees by the very woman he had underestimated. I could have left it at that. I could have walked away, let the wreckage crumble behind me without another word. But I wanted him to remember this moment for the rest of his life. So I leaned in once more, my voice barely above a whisper. "You said you had me right where you wanted me," I murmured. "But Ethan, darling, you never had me at all." And with that I walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins of his own making. I walked out of that room without looking back, feeling the weight of my own liberation settle over me like a warm, intoxicating rush of victory. The air outside felt different, lighter, fresher. As if the universe itself had been waiting for this moment, for Ethan's world to finally collapse under the weight of his own deceit. For the first time in years I was free. But freedom didn't mean the game was over. Not yet. I reached the lobby of our building, my heels clicking against the polished floor, and pulled out my phone. Ethan was still upstairs, probably pacing, probably trying to come up with some desperate attempt at damage control. But there was no fixing this. His name, Liam's name, it was all over the internet now. And the fallout had only just begun. A new notification popped up. Breaking news. High-profile investment firm under scrutiny following internal scandal leak. I clicked the link. There it was. The first real blow. A full article detailing the suspicious activities within Ethan and Liam's company, pieced together with anonymous tips and financial discrepancies that had been hidden for years. The article didn't name them outright. Not yet, but anyone who worked in their circle would know. I had made sure of that. I scrolled down, watching comments flood in, speculations growing, people piecing together the puzzle faster than I expected. Then another message. Liam, what did you do? I smiled, then locked my phone. I wasn't going to waste my time on Liam's panic. He had spent years treating me like an afterthought, assuming I was just a shadow in Ethan's life. But he knew now, didn't he? He knew that the woman he had mocked, belittled, and whispered about behind her back had just pulled the ground from beneath him. I stepped outside and inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. It felt good. It felt earned. Then my phone rang. I didn't even need to look at the screen. I knew it would be Ethan. I let it ring. Once. Twice. By the fourth time I answered. Silence. Then his voice, low, sharp, teetering on the edge of desperation. Ava. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring it. The way my name left his lips, no longer filled with arrogance or entitlement. No longer spoken like he owned me. What do you want, Ethan? His breathing was uneven. We need to talk. We talked already, I said, my tone almost too casual. Back in that room. Unless you weren't listening. You know that's not what I mean. I glanced around, watching as people bustled by, oblivious to the chaos unfolding in his world. I really don't have time for this, I murmured. Ava, please. That word. Please. How many times had I begged for his attention? How many times had I swallowed my pride, told myself I was overthinking it, told myself I was being too sensitive? And now here he was, the man who once stood so tall, unraveling in real time. I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of it. Everything is falling apart, he admitted, his voice tight. Liam is panicking. The company, there's an internal investigation now. I don't know what you did, but... I cut him off. Oh, Ethan, I said, smiling as I repeated the words he once said to me. You could do better than this. He sucked in a sharp breath. This isn't a joke. I know, I said. It's justice. You're going to regret this, he snapped, that desperate edge sharpening into anger. I laughed softly. That's where you're wrong. The only regret I have is not doing this sooner. More silence. Then his voice dropped into something almost broken. Did you ever love me? The question caught me off guard. For a moment I considered lying. I considered telling him no, that it had all been a facade, that he had never mattered. But that would have been too easy. And the truth was far worse. I did, I admitted. I loved you more than you ever deserved. His breathing hitched. And that, I added, my voice steady, unyielding, is why I'm done. I ended the call before he could speak. It was over. But not for Liam. I turned and walked toward my next destination, a coffee shop just a few blocks away. Inside, waiting at a corner table, was a man dressed in a sharp suit, a laptop open in front of him. He glanced up as I approached, nodding in acknowledgement. You did well, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I took a seat, folding my hands in my lap. Is it enough? His lips curved into a slow smirk. More than enough. I exhaled. Good. We sat in silence for a moment before he slid a folder toward me. This is everything you asked for. Liam's financials. His personal accounts. His hidden investments. I opened the folder, scanning the contents. It was worse than I thought. He chuckled, watching my reaction. You want the final blow? I met his gaze. Yes. Then I suggest you drop this where it'll do the most damage. I snapped the folder shut. I know just the place. Liam had spent years trying to tear me down, feeding Ethan's arrogance, whispering in his ear like a parasite. He thought he was untouchable. He wasn't. The next morning the headlines changed. Breaking. Internal corruption uncovered. Executive under federal investigation. Liam's name was right there in the first paragraph. Ethan's was mentioned by association. I sipped my coffee as I read through the article, watching the world react in real time. Their friends, their colleagues, their investors. One by one they began to distance themselves, cutting ties, issuing statements. By noon, Liam had called me 4 times. I didn't answer. By evening, Ethan's number appeared again. I blocked it. The reckoning had come, and it had come swiftly. The last message I received that night was from an unknown number. Unknown. You ruined us. I stared at it for a long moment before typing back. You ruined yourselves. Then I turned off my phone. And for the first time in years I slept soundly. The morning after everything unraveled, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind I had endured for years. The silence of being ignored, belittled, made to feel invisible. No, this was a different kind. A peaceful stillness. The kind that followed a storm after it had ripped through everything in its path, leaving only truth behind. I sat up in bed, stretching, my body lighter than it had felt in years. No more waking up with the nagging weight of wondering if today would be the day I finally saw the truth about Ethan. I had already seen it, had already exposed it for the world to witness. And now there was nothing left but the ruins of his own making. Reaching for my phone, I scrolled through the latest updates. The headlines were relentless. Liam caught in financial scandal, facing legal investigation. Ethan Murphy under scrutiny. Company stocks plummet amidst internal crisis. Every article, every comment thread, every discussion was a confirmation that the power Ethan and Liam had once wielded was slipping through their fingers. The people who had once admired them were now distancing themselves, turning their backs, pretending they had never been allies. And Ethan? He had disappeared. I checked my messages. No new calls. No texts. The silence was telling. He was still reeling, still trying to figure out how everything had collapsed so quickly. But there was nothing left for him to salvage. A soft knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I stood, wrapping my robe around myself, and opened it. It was Emily. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, her eyes scanning my face carefully. You okay? I exhaled a slow breath, nodding. Better than okay. She smirked, crossing her arms. I'd say so. You basically just burned your cheating ex-husband's empire to the ground and made sure his snake of a best friend went down with him. That's not just okay. That's legendary. I chuckled, shaking my head. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. Emily raised an eyebrow. No. I paused, considering. No. It was about truth. About making sure they faced consequences for once in their lives. They always thought they were untouchable, like they could lie, cheat, manipulate, and no one would ever hold them accountable. Her expression softened. And now? Now they know what it feels like to be powerless. She studied me for a long moment before nodding in approval. So what's next? The question lingered in the air. For so long my life had revolved around Ethan. Around making him happy, around trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect woman for a man who never deserved me. And when I discovered his betrayal, my focus shifted to exposing the truth, to making sure he didn't walk away unscathed. But now I was free. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the city skyline through the window. I don't know, I admitted. For the first time in a long time, I don't have a plan. And I think I'm okay with that. Emily grinned, plopping down beside me. Well, I think a fresh start is exactly what you need. Fresh start. The word settled into my chest, warm and unfamiliar. A concept I had never let myself fully embrace before. But now, with Ethan's absence and the weight of his deception finally lifted, the idea of starting over didn't feel scary. It felt exciting. Emily nudged me. You could do anything. Go anywhere. No more looking over your shoulder. No more lies. Just you, doing whatever you want for the first time in forever. I exhaled a soft laugh, shaking my head. That sounds nice. He shot me a look. It sounds necessary. Listen, you've spent years building your life around Ethan. It's time to build one for yourself. And if you need any help, she smirked, I happen to know a thing or two about reinvention. I smiled at her. You always do. The thought of leaving everything behind, of stepping away from the wreckage and moving forward, was liberating. I didn't need to stay and watch Ethan's downfall. That part was already in motion. He had made his choices. And now he would have to live with them. Later that afternoon, I checked my email, scanning through various unread messages, most of them from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Colleagues, acquaintances, even strangers who had somehow heard about what had happened and wanted to reach out. But one message stood out. It was from Ethan. I hesitated before opening it. Subject, please. Ava. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know if you'll even read this, but I need to try. You won. I get it. You wanted me to feel the way you felt, and now I do. Everything is gone. Liam is done. The company is falling apart. I lost everything. But what I regret the most is losing you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve it. But I need you to know that not all of it was a lie. Not all of it was a game. I loved you, Ava. In my own way, I did. I just wish I had realized it before it was too late. I stared at the words, my chest tight. Not because I missed him, not because his regret meant anything to me now, but because it was the first time I had ever seen Ethan admit he was wrong. The first time he had ever acknowledged the depth of what he had done. But it didn't change anything. I closed the email and hit delete. It was over. And I was finally ready to move forward. That night, I booked a one-way ticket out of the city. A new destination, a new life waiting for me. I wasn't running away. I was stepping into something better. Something I had created for myself. And as I packed my bags, I realized, this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. On my birthday, silence. No husband, no family. I called, he laughed. I'm in Lake Como, with your sister. She purred. He's divorcing you and upgrading. I sent a photo. Me in Monaco, dressed to kill, beside a surprise guest. Their calls flooded in. I smiled, slid into a Rolls-Royce Phantom and drove off without a word. The buzzing of my phone's alarm felt more piercing than usual on this morning, my 34th birthday. I silenced it and stared at the empty space beside me where Matthew should have been. No text messages. No missed calls. No hastily scrawled note on his pillow. Just the hollow echo of promises he'd made last week before leaving for what he claimed was a crucial business meeting in Lake Como. I'll call first thing in the morning on your birthday, Lily, he'd said, kissing my forehead. You know I hate missing it. 7 a.m. came and went. 8. 9. The house filled with the sounds of Andrew and Ella preparing for school, their innocent chatter about making me birthday pancakes stinging worse than Matthew's silence. I forced a smile as they presented their lopsided stack dripping with too much syrup, 8-year-old Andrew beaming with pride while 6-year-old Ella had managed to get more batter on herself than the plate. Mommy, when's Daddy calling? Ella asked, maple syrup creating sticky patterns on her cheeks. Soon, sweetheart. I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. He's probably just busy with his meetings. After dropping them at school, I returned to our empty suburban home. The modest 4-bedroom we'd purchased 3 years ago when Matthew's business finally took off after years of struggle. I walked past the framed family photos lining the hallway, my eyes lingering on our wedding picture. 7 years ago, I'd been 27, bright-eyed and full of plans for both my teaching career and our life together. Now I barely recognized that woman. At 11, I finally broke down and called him. The international ringtone pulsed in my ear once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when he answered. Hey, Matthew said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar lightness. Music played in the background, along with the clink of glasses and distant laughter. Not the sounds of a business meeting. It's my birthday, I said simply. There was a pause, then a laugh that didn't quite sound like regret. Right, sorry about that. Lost track of time here. The meetings have been intense. A woman's giggle floated through the connection. Too close to the phone. Too familiar. Sounds intense, I replied, my knuckles whitening around my cell phone. Just having a quick lunch break, he said, his words slightly slurred. Listen, I'll call you back. The woman's voice grew clearer. Matt, who is it? Tell them to call back later. The sound of my sister's voice was unmistakable, even through the haze of my disbelief. My stomach plummeted as if I'd missed a step on a staircase. My sister. Alexandra. The one who'd stood beside me at my wedding, who'd held my hand through both difficult childbirths, who'd supposedly been in Seattle this week for her job. Is that Alex? I asked, my voice unnaturally calm. A brief silence, then Matthew chuckled, as if we were discussing something trivial. Yeah, ran into her here, crazy coincidence. I heard rustling, then my sister's voice came through clearly. Hey sis, happy birthday. Surprise. Her false cheerfulness couldn't mask the slight slur in her words. I was going to call you later. I'm sure, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. More rustling, than Matthew again. Listen Lil, I gotta go. I'll bring you something nice from Italy, okay? Let me talk to Alex again, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. A pause, then Alexandra's voice, more guarded now. What's up? How long? I asked simply. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, but her nervous laugh gave her away. I heard Matthew asking what was wrong in the background, his voice distant. Then a muffled exchange I couldn't quite make out. Alexandra came back on the line, her voice dripping with sudden cruelty I'd never heard from her before. If you must know, almost a year. He's divorcing you and upgrading, sis. You really let yourself go after Ella was born. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered against the kitchen tile. I didn't bother picking it up, even as I heard tinny voices calling my name. Instead, I sat at our kitchen island, the one Matthew and I had picked out together during a rare weekend without the kids, and tried to breathe through the vice tightening around my chest. When I finally retrieved my phone, I blocked both their numbers. They could stew in Lake Como, wondering if I was falling apart. I refused to give them the satisfaction of my tears. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I picked up the kids from school with my mask firmly in place, smiling and nodding as they chattered about their day. I baked my own birthday cake while they did homework, my movements mechanical. When Andrew asked about Daddy calling, I told him Matthew's phone was having problems, but he'd call tomorrow. After tucking them in, I retreated to our bedroom closet. At the back, behind winter coats we rarely used in Virginia's mild climate, I found the old storage box I was looking for. Inside lay photo albums from before Matthew, before I'd become Mrs. Chambers, back when I was just Lily Morrison with dreams of her own. The first album showed me in my college graduation gown, my teaching certificate held proudly in hand. My parents flanked me, their faces beaming with pride for their first-generation college graduate. I'd been so determined then, securing my first teaching position at Westbrook Elementary before I'd even had my diploma in hand. I flipped through more pages. Photos with my college roommates on weekend hiking trips, volunteer work at literacy programs, my first classroom decorated with painfully earnest motivational posters. My fingers traced the face of a young woman who believed her future was limitless. Then came pictures of Matthew and me during our whirlwind romance. Our first date at a cafe near the school where I taught third grade. Weekend trips to nearby beaches. The small but perfect diamond ring he'd presented after just 6 months together. I remembered how supportive he'd seemed of my career at first. Then came his job losses, 3 in rapid succession. The gentle suggestions that perhaps I could take a year off to support him emotionally while he found his footing. The pregnancy with Andrew that made the decision easier. The promise that it would be temporary. But temporary had stretched into permanent. Matthew's struggling business eventually took off in year 4 of our marriage, around the time Ella was born. By then my teaching certificate had lapsed, and the woman in these photographs had disappeared into grocery lists, pediatrician appointments, and being the perfect corporate wife at Matthew's business dinners. I closed the album and leaned back against the closet wall, surrounded by the detritus of a life I'd willingly put on hold for a man who was at this very moment laughing in Lake Como with my sister. The betrayal cut deep, but something else was stirring beneath the pain. A flicker of the determination that young woman in the photographs once possessed. Tomorrow I decided I would start making calls. But tonight I allowed myself to mourn, not just for my marriage but for the years I'd lost sight of myself. Sleep evaded me that night. By 5 in the morning I abandoned the pretense, slipped on my robe and padded downstairs with a determination I hadn't felt in years. If Matthew wanted a divorce, I needed to understand exactly what I'd be fighting for, or against. His home office had always been off limits, an unspoken rule established early in our marriage. Business papers are boring and confidential, he'd say whenever I ventured too close. Nothing you need to worry your pretty head about. The condescension had always bothered me, but I'd swallowed it along with so many other small indignities. Not today. The door opened silently and I flicked on his desk lamp, casting a soft glow across the meticulously organized space. Unlike the rest of our home where evidence of family life abounded, this room contained no photos of the children or me. Just degrees, awards, and a single picture of Matthew shaking hands with the mayor at a Chamber of Commerce event. I started with the filing cabinet, methodically working through folders labeled with client names and project numbers. Most contained contracts and correspondence I only partially understood, but in the drawer marked pending, I found a thick folder for something called Project Apex. The proposal outlined a massive commercial development in Northern Virginia, easily 5 times larger than anything Matthew's company had managed before. My breath caught when I turned to the final page and saw the potential client's name. Ryan Calloway, CO, Calloway Development Corp. Ryan Calloway. The name hit me like a physical blow. Ryan from Westlake High. Ryan who'd taught me to drive stick shift in his father's old pickup. Ryan who'd taken me to senior prom when my original date came down with mono. Ryan who'd stayed in touch through college before life and distance gradually pulled us apart. I hadn't thought of him in years, but seeing his name now felt like a lifeline being thrown while I was drowning. I checked the date on the proposal. It was scheduled for final review next week. According to Matthew's calendar, which I found open on his laptop, he would be meeting Ryan's team in New York on Tuesday to finalize the details. Lake Como had never been a business trip. Just a romantic getaway with my sister while closing in on the biggest deal of his career. Dawn was breaking as I made coffee and settled at the kitchen table with my laptop. A quick search confirmed that Ryan had indeed done well for himself, building a reputation for sustainable commercial developments with community focus. His company bio mentioned his Virginia roots and commitment to revitalizing smaller communities with thoughtful growth, values Matthew had always dismissed as unprofitable idealism when discussing competitors. I hesitated with my finger over the Contact Us button on the Calloway Development website. What exactly was I hoping to accomplish? Warn an old friend about my husband's character? Beg for information? The desperation of my situation suddenly hit me full force and tears threatened again. Then I noticed something in the project description that didn't add up. The proposal in Matthew's office included several innovative community integration concepts that I'd never heard him discuss. In fact, they sounded nothing like his usual profit-first approach. I dug deeper into the Calloway development site and found similar language in Ryan's previous projects. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed the direct number listed on the proposal. Calloway. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably Ryan's. It's Lily, I said, surprised at how small my voice sounded. Lily Morrison. Well, Chambers now, but... Lily. The shock in his voice was evident, followed quickly by warmth. This is unexpected. How are you? It's been 9 years? Almost 10, I said, memories flooding back of our last meeting. A quick coffee when he was passing through town just before I met Matthew. I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this. Don't apologize. It's good to hear from you. He paused. Is everything okay? You sound. Not really, I admitted. Ryan, this is going to sound strange, but do you know Matthew Chambers? He owns Chamberworks Development. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Yes, we're considering a proposal from his company. His voice had cooled slightly. Lily, are you calling about business? Because that would be. He's my husband, I interrupted. And he's currently in Lake Como with my sister, telling me it's a business trip while planning to divorce me. Another long pause. I'm sorry, Ryan finally said, his voice gentler. That's awful. But I'm not sure how I can help. The proposal he sent you, I said, flipping through the pages in front of me. These community integration concepts. The sustainable materials sourcing plan. The local artist installations. Did he present these as his ideas? He did, Ryan replied slowly. Are you saying they're not? They're nothing like anything he's ever built or talked about, I explained. Matthew thinks public spaces in commercial developments are wasted revenue opportunities. His exact words at our last neighborhood association meeting. Interesting, Ryan said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. Because those elements were exactly what put his proposal ahead of others. We have a meeting next Tuesday to finalize. I took a deep breath. I think he's copied these ideas from somewhere else, possibly from your own previous projects. It wouldn't be the first time he's taken credit for other people's work. The silence that followed was different, calculating rather than shocked. Lily, I think we should continue this conversation in person, Ryan finally said. Can you meet me tomorrow? I'm actually in Falls Church for a site visit. There's a cafe called Roasted on Main Street. I have kids, I said automatically, the reflexive response of a mother who's forgotten how to prioritize herself. Bring them, he said simply. I'd like to meet them. And Lily? Bring that proposal if you can. I think we have a lot to discuss. As I hung up, I noticed my hands had stopped shaking. For the first time since that devastating phone call yesterday, I felt something beyond pain and shock. It was a rusty, unfamiliar feeling that took me a moment to identify. It was the stirring of purpose. And perhaps, just maybe, the first inkling of justice. Sleep came easier that night, purpose replacing the hollow ache of betrayal. I woke before my alarm, mind already racing with the day ahead. After getting the kids off to school, I drove straight to the bank where Matthew and I held our joint accounts. I'd like to review all our accounts and safe deposit box access, I told the personal banker, a woman named Janet who'd helped us set everything up years ago. Her eyes flickered with recognition, not of me but of the situation. Of course, Mrs. Chambers. Is Mr. Chambers joining us today? No, I said firmly. But as a joint account holder, I have every right to this information. An hour later, I left with a complete picture of our finances, including copies of recent statements, wire transfers, and access logs. What I found confirmed my suspicions. Matthew had been gradually moving money to a separate account for months, small amounts that wouldn't trigger my attention. Not enough to empty our savings, but enough to establish a comfortable cushion for himself. My next stop was to a divorce attorney recommended by Janet in a whispered conversation as I was leaving. She helped my sister when her husband did something similar, she'd said, slipping me a business card. Patricia Miller's office was modest but professional, her handshake firm and her eyes kind but shrewd. Tell me everything, she said after I'd settled into the chair across from her desk. I did, from the birthday phone call to the discovered business documents to the separate bank accounts. Classic pre-divorce behavior, she confirmed, making notes. And the business? Your name isn't on any of it. No. He always insisted it was better for tax purposes. She nodded. But you've been supporting him throughout its development? Taking care of the home, children, entertaining clients, allowing him to focus entirely on building the company. For 7 years, I confirmed. Then you're entitled to a portion of its value regardless of whose name is on the paperwork. Virginia recognizes contributions of a homemaking spouse. She tapped her pen against her notepad. What's your ideal outcome here, Lily? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on what I was losing that I hadn't considered what I wanted to gain. Stability for my children, I said automatically. Financial security. And I hesitated, then added, recognition for what I've sacrificed. Patricia smiled for the first time. Good. Now let's talk strategy. By the time I left her office, I had a clear plan for the legal aspects. Don't confront Matthew yet. Document everything. Secure copies of all important papers. Establish independent accounts. But the business angle, that required a different approach altogether. I met Ryan at Roasted as planned, Andrew and Ella in tow with their backpacks full of activities. They sat at a nearby table with hot chocolates and cookies while Ryan and I talked at a discreet distance. I've looked deeper into the proposal, Ryan said after warm greetings and catching up. These aren't just similar concepts to our previous projects. They're direct copies, down to some of the wording. I slid across the additional documents I'd taken from Matthew's office. There's more. These are preliminary sketches for the innovative community spaces he's proposing. Ryan examined them, frowning. These are almost identical to the riverfront commons we completed in Pittsburgh last year. We had those published in Urban Development Quarterly, which Matthew subscribes to, I confirmed, along with every major publication in the industry. Ryan set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Lily, this is intellectual property theft. If we'd signed this deal. I know. I met his eyes steadily. And I'm guessing this isn't the first time he's done it. Ryan pulled out his tablet and quickly searched something. The Westbrook Center his company completed last year. I thought it looked familiar. It's remarkably similar to a Henderson design project from Chicago. We looked at each other, the implications clear. My husband wasn't just an unfaithful spouse. He was a fraud whose business success was built on stolen ideas. I need to cancel this deal, Ryan said. But more importantly, we need to document this pattern. I asked, surprised by his investment in the situation. I've always wondered what happened to the Lily Morrison I knew, the one who was going to change education for underprivileged kids one classroom at a time. His smile was gentle but searching. I'm seeing glimpses of her again. I glanced at my children, happily drawing at their table. She got lost somewhere between diaper changes and being the perfect corporate wife. Well, I'm glad she's finding her way back. He hesitated, then continued. Our European headquarters is in Monaco. I need to fly there next week for quarterly meetings. The timing might work in our favor. How so? Matthew expects to sign this deal Tuesday. When he discovers it's cancelled, he'll be desperate to salvage it. Desperate enough to follow if I suggest relocating the meeting. I caught his meaning immediately. To Monaco. Exactly. Away from his comfort zone. Away from his support network. Ryan leaned forward. And if his wife and children happened to be there too? He'd panic. I finished, the pieces falling into place. Especially if he thinks I know everything. Over the next hour, a plan took shape between us. Not just a confrontation, but a carefully orchestrated series of moves designed to protect my interests and expose Matthew's deceptions. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, I stood before my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. Somewhere in the past 7 years I'd stopped seeing myself. Really seeing the woman behind the roles of mother and wife. My wardrobe had shifted to what Matthew preferred. My hairstyle chosen for low maintenance rather than how it framed my face. On impulse, I grabbed scissors and cut the long layers Matthew had always insisted made me look more feminine. The shoulder-length bob that emerged felt like a declaration of independence. The next day I took half of our accessible savings and opened my own account. I contacted our family doctor and arranged for both children's medical records to be copied. I had copies made of birth certificates, social security cards, and passports. Each action was a stitch in the safety net I was weaving for our future. Ryan called daily, updating me on the business side of our strategy. He'd formally canceled the deal with Matthew's company, citing irreconcilable differences in business philosophy. He's called me 6 times, Ryan reported. I finally took his call and suggested we might reconsider if he met me in Monaco next week to discuss a revised approach. And he booked his flight immediately. First class. Ryan's voice held grim satisfaction. He's desperate to salvage this. I made our own travel arrangements, not first class but comfortable enough for the children's first international flight. As I packed our suitcases, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This wasn't just an escape or a confrontation. It was reclaiming the life that had been slowly disappearing beneath the weight of Matthew's expectations and deceptions. Are we really going to Europe, Mom? Andrew asked excitedly as I tucked his favorite books into his carry-on. Yes, sweetheart. And it's going to be the beginning of something new for all of us. The flight to Nice was a blur of in-flight movies, Andrew's endless questions about Europe, and Ella falling asleep against my shoulder. We landed early in the morning, the Mediterranean sunlight painting everything in shades of gold that seemed almost dreamlike after the emotional darkness of the past week. Is that the ocean? Ella asked, pressing her face against the taxi window as we traveled from Nice to Monaco. It's the Mediterranean Sea, I explained, feeling a flutter of excitement despite everything. I'd never been to Europe. Matthew had always traveled internationally for business alone, claiming it wasn't practical to bring family along. Our hotel overlooked the harbor, modest by Monaco standards but still nicer than anywhere I'd stayed in years. Ryan had booked connecting rooms for us, with a small balcony where the children immediately rushed to count the yachts bobbing in the distance. They're adjusting well, Ryan observed, joining me at the railing while the kids debated whether a particularly large vessel qualified as a super yacht. Kids are resilient, I said, though my stomach churned with doubt. I've told them we're helping with Daddy's business trip and having a special adventure. The truth will come soon enough. Ryan's company headquarters occupied 2 floors of a sleek building near Monte Carlo. He'd arranged for the hotel's childcare service to watch Andrew and Ella while we attended to business, promising them an afternoon exploring Monaco's oceanographic museum afterward. "Are you ready for this?" Ryan asked as we entered the modern lobby with its panoramic views of the city and sea beyond. I smoothed down the navy blue dress I'd purchased specifically for this confrontation. Professional enough for a business setting, elegant enough to make a statement. As ready as I'll ever be. We timed it perfectly. Matthew was scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m. for what he believed was a meeting to salvage the deal. At 1:30, we gathered in the conference room with Ryan's legal team and chief financial officer, who had been briefed on the situation. "We have clear evidence of intellectual property infringement," the company's legal counsel confirmed, reviewing the documents I'd provided. "Multiple instances across several projects." Ryan nodded grimly. "Enough to justify immediate termination of negotiations and potentially pursue damages." The corporate language felt strange in my mouth, but I pushed through. "I'd like to be present when you inform him," I said. "But not immediately visible." Ryan understood. We arranged the seating so I would be partially obscured by a support column when Matthew first entered. His assistant showed us the security feed from the lobby on her tablet. Matthew had arrived early, pacing nervously near the reception desk. "Showtime," Ryan murmured. I watched Matthew enter the conference room, his confident stride faltering slightly when he saw the assembled executives. He hadn't expected a full meeting. He'd been hoping for a private conversation where his charm could work its magic. "Matthew," Ryan greeted him coolly. "Please have a seat." "Ryan, good to see you in person," Matthew said, reaching for a handshake that Ryan didn't reciprocate. The rebuff was subtle but unmistakable. Matthew's smile tightened as he took the offered seat. "I appreciate you reconsidering our proposal." "That's not why you're here," Ryan replied, sliding a folder across the table. "These are direct comparisons between your proposal and existing projects. Some ours, some from other firms, showing unmistakable plagiarism of design concepts, community integration strategies, even specific wording." Matthew's face drained of color. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," I said, finally shifting into his line of sight. "I found all the source materials in your office, Matthew. The magazines, the downloaded PDFs, even your notes on how to adapt them." The shock on his face was almost worth everything I'd been through. "Lily, what the hell are you doing here?" "Supporting my friend's business interests," I replied calmly. "Just as I've supported yours all these years." Matthew's eyes darted between Ryan and me, calculation replacing shock. "I don't know what she's told you, but my wife has been emotionally unstable lately." "Save it," Ryan interrupted. "We've verified everything independently. The deal is permanently cancelled and we're evaluating our legal options regarding your unauthorized use of our intellectual property." Matthew's lawyer mask slipped completely. "You can't do this. This deal is worth millions to my company. I've already started preliminary work." "Based on stolen ideas," I interjected. "Just like you've stolen years of my life under false pretenses." The meeting concluded quickly after that. Ryan's legal team presented Matthew with formal termination papers for the deal, along with a cease and desist regarding any use of Callaway development concepts. Matthew signed with a shaking hand, his eyes repeatedly flicking to me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. As the executives filed out, leaving just the three of us, Matthew turned on me. "Is this what it's about? Punishing me because I want a divorce? Destroying my business because I fell for someone else?" "Hi, sister," I corrected icily. "And no, this isn't punishment. It's consequences. For your business practices and your personal ones." Ryan stood. "I think we're done here." As Matthew gathered his papers with jerky movements, I made my move. "Just one thing before you go," I said, pulling out my phone. "Let's commemorate this moment." Ryan understood immediately, moving to stand beside me against the floor-to-ceiling window with its stunning view of Monaco's harbor. I positioned myself carefully, confident but not smug, elegant but not trying too hard. The woman I'd glimpsed in those old photographs finally returned. "Marina," Ryan called to his assistant who was returning with some paperwork, "would you mind taking a photo of us?" She snapped several as Matthew watched, confusion and anger warring on his face. I reviewed the images, selecting the perfect one. Ryan and I looking professional and at ease, the magnificent Monaco backdrop unmistakable, both of us with subtle smiles of victory. Matthew stormed out as I pressed send, attaching the photo to a message that read simply, "Thought you should know where I am. The children send their love." We collected Andrew and Ella from the hotel childcare and spent the afternoon as promised at the Oceanographic Museum, my phone buzzing constantly in my purse. 6 missed calls from Matthew. 4 from my sister. Dozens of increasingly frantic text messages. "Are you going to answer those?" Ryan asked as we watched the children press their faces against the glass of a tropical fish exhibit. "Not yet," I replied, experiencing a strange new feeling that took me a moment to identify. Power. Not the vindictive kind, but the steady assurance of someone who had finally taken control of her own story. As the sun began to set, painting the Mediterranean in fiery orange and deep purples, Ryan drove us along the coastal road in his company car. A tasteful BMW, not flashy but undeniably elegant. "What happens now?" he asked as the children dozed in the back seat, exhausted from their day of adventures. I silenced my still vibrating phone without checking it. "Now we go home and face reality, but on my terms, not his." The road curved along the coastline, each turn revealing another breathtaking view. For the first time in years, I felt the same sense of possibility stretching before me, beautiful, unknown, and finally mine to navigate. The flight home from Monaco felt different from any journey I'd taken before. Not an ending but a beginning. We landed in Virginia on a crisp autumn morning, the familiar landscape of our hometown appearing both unchanged and entirely new through my transformed perspective. My phone had over 50 missed calls by then. I'd answered only one, from Patricia Miller, my divorce attorney, who was already preparing for the storm that would inevitably follow. When we pulled into our driveway, I wasn't surprised to see Matthew's car already there, his silhouette pacing behind the living room curtains. "Wait in the car with the children," I told Ryan, who had insisted on driving us from the airport. "If things get heated, I'll call you." Matthew flung open the front door before I reached the porch steps. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, then caught himself as neighbors across the street paused their gardening to watch. He lowered his voice to a hiss. "You took our children to another country without permission. Do you have any idea the legal trouble you're in?" "All the documentation is in order," I replied calmly, brushing past him into our home. "And unlike your trip to Lake Como with my sister, mine was actually about business." His face contorted with rage. "I've spoken to my lawyer. Taking the children internationally without my consent." "Oh, I had your consent," I interrupted, pulling out my phone and showing him a text message he'd sent months ago. *, fine with me if you want to take a trip with the kids this year. Just let me know when. *, not very specific but legally sufficient. Patricia confirmed it. The first hearing came 3 weeks later. Matthew had hired Brandon Ellis, a notorious divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics. I sat beside Patricia at one table, Matthew and Brandon at the other. A chasm of polished wood between us that felt as vast as an ocean. "Your Honor," Brandon began, "Mrs. Chambers absconded with the children to Monaco without proper notification to their father, demonstrating emotional instability and poor judgment." Patricia calmly presented my documented communication attempts during the trip, the children's maintained school assignments, and most damaging to Matthew's case, the recording of his Lake Como call where he'd laughed about being with my sister. "It appears Mr. Chambers was not concerned about his children's whereabouts while enjoying Italy with his sister-in-law," Patricia noted dryly. The judge's expression spoke volumes. Matthew's attacks grew more desperate as the proceedings continued. He claimed I was financially irresponsible, despite my meticulous household accounting. He suggested I was emotionally unstable, contradicted by evaluations from the court-appointed family counselor who praised my steady support of the children through the separation. Most painfully, he tried to leverage Andrew and Ella. "Daddy says we might have to move away from you sometimes," Andrew confided one evening, his small face crumpled with worry. "He says the judge might make us." I gathered both children into my arms. "Your dad is scared right now, and sometimes scared people say things they shouldn't. But here's what I promise. I will always be your mom, and no judge will ever change that." While the legal battle dragged on, I began tentatively reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Coffee with Jennifer, my former teaching colleague. Lunch with Mark and Diane, our neighbors whom Matthew had deemed Not our kind of people, after his business took off. We missed you, Jennifer said simply. The real you. I missed me too, I admitted. I'm still trying to figure out who that is again. The most difficult reunion was with my parents. They'd been wary of Matthew from the beginning, their concerns driving a wedge between us when I interpreted their hesitation as lack of support for my choices. We should have tried harder to stay connected, my mother said, tears in her eyes as she hugged me in their familiar kitchen. Instead of just watching you disappear. I wouldn't have listened, I acknowledged. I had to find my own way back. My father, never a man of many words, simply said, "You're stronger than you know, Lily. Always have been." 6 months after Monaco, we reached the final divorce settlement. Matthew's business had suffered from the cancelled Callaway deal and whispers about his methods that had spread through the industry. He'd grown weary of fighting a battle he was increasingly likely to lose, especially after evidence of his financial maneuvering came to light. The terms were better than I'd dared hope. Primary custody of Andrew and Ella, the family home, half of our joint assets, and a significant portion of the business valuation, recognizing my years of supporting its growth from behind the scenes. It's more than fair, Patricia assured me as I signed the final papers. It's just. Matthew refused to meet my eyes at the last hearing, his sister conspicuously absent from his side after their relationship had publicly imploded. As we left the courthouse, he finally spoke directly to me. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said, something like reluctant respect in his voice. "That was always your biggest mistake," I replied simply. 1 week after the divorce was finalized, I sat at our kitchen table. My kitchen table now, surrounded by college brochures and online program printouts. Andrew and Ella helped me sort them into piles, turning the process into a game. "This one has pictures of kids in the classroom," Ella pointed out, pushing a brochure for a local university's education program toward me. "That means it's perfect for you, Mommy. Hudson State has an accelerated program for people who already have some credits." Andrew read carefully from another pamphlet. "That's you, right?" "That's me," I confirmed, ruffling his hair. The doorbell rang and Ryan stood on the porch holding a small gift bag. Our friendship had deepened over the months since Monaco, careful and respectful, both of us aware of the precarious timing. "I brought you something to celebrate Decision Day," he said, stepping inside. From the bag I pulled a beautiful leather-bound planner embossed with my name, my maiden name, Morrison. "For your new schedule," he explained. "I figured between classes, the kids, and everything else you might need this." "It's perfect," I said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness and the lack of pressure behind it. Later, after the children were in bed, we sat on the back porch with cups of tea, discussing my final program selection. Hudson State's teaching certification pathway with a specialization in educational support for underprivileged communities. 2 years from now you'll be back in the classroom, Ryan observed. Terrifying and exhilarating all at once, I admitted. Starting over at 34 wasn't exactly the plan. Not starting over, he corrected gently. Continuing from where you left off. There's a difference. As the evening breeze carried the scent of my newly planted garden, I reflected on the journey of the past year, from the silent birthday that had shattered my world to this moment of quiet possibility. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear or guaranteed, but it was authentically mine. I'd lost a husband but found myself, and somehow that felt like the better end of the bargain.